Hello guys, welcome to my channel. Thank you for putting it on. And in this video, I wanted to continue a bit the dive into the Eritrean history and the history of the wider region surrounding Eritrea. This time the topic will be the Red Sea, and I want to make this video to show kind of the history of the Red Sea, its importance up to nowadays, but from antiquity. So we'll go on a quick ride through antiquity first, which means like starting at 2500 before Christ up to today, 2024. So I don't know if I can capture it all, since I'm not a scholar and I didn't study the history of the Red Sea. And I'm basically researching from public sources, but I want to share what I discover on that journey with you guys. Maybe you find it interesting too, and it can help you in your own interest or to develop your own interests. For me, it's an extremely rich dive into history of my second country, Eritrea, its surroundings and its connection up to Europe, to China, to like really USA, to Soviet Union or succeeding countries, etc. So it's absolutely interesting, and I hope that you will enjoy the little ride we do. So I will link some sources if you want to dig deeper in some topics afterwards. But as I said, I will start the ride in 2500 before Christ, and I start, as so many things start, with the ancient Egyptians. Apparently, they were the first to kind of explore the Red Sea area towards the south. Of course, Egypt and also the ancient Egyptians had access to the Red Sea from the northern part of, but they also tried to reach the south of the Red Sea, or the southern part of the Red Sea, in search of a trade route with the Kingdom of Punt. Punt is a very controversial country, I would say, since many of the nowadays countries claim to be the inheritors of the Kingdom of Punt. One of them being Eritrea. So Eritrea prides itself also of being the location of the Kingdom of Punt, but I know also Somalia does it, and I know also, I think Sudan does it too. So it's a bit debatable, and I don't want it to get too big into this debate, since I want the unifying factor in front of it. So 2500, the ancient Egyptians started exploring this trade route, which became increasingly important up to nowadays, I would even say, but also in ancient times it was one of the main arteries of international trade. But after the Egyptians, a very interesting period for the Red Sea history appeared also via the Persians. So at 500 before Christ, King Dariusz of Persia, of the Axumite Empire, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the Axumite or Axumite Empire, established a presence there, and he mainly or is quoted in my sources that I found, at least, for having established, of course, he wanted to have a trade link between the Persian Empire and the Red Sea, like towards the Egyptians and other power centers, like also the Axumite Empire, that was very big at that time already, I think, but I'm not sure. No, it wasn't actually, like it came a bit later, I think, but there were also some smaller kingdoms on the way, like nowadays Eritrea, Ethiopia, and well, Eritrea mainly the coastal side, of course. Other in Oman, I think, was also a big trading center throughout antiquity, and others. And of course, yeah, he was mainly retained for having established what is called the first Suez Canal. Of course, most of you may know the Suez Canal, but at that time, what he did, he established a canal between like the sweetwater source of the Nile and the northern part of the Red Sea. So towards the northern part of nowadays Egypt, like he established a canal already to increase the trade routes also from the sweet water up to the salt water, which is the Red Sea. So very interesting also to have this already, and apparently a lot of other channels like this or canals were established later on. But let's not go too much into it, since like as I said, I go from 2500 before Christ up to 2024. So like please be a bit patient with me, or like if I skip some things. So the next very interesting period, also of course from the perspective of Europeans, was the Greek period, because as you know, the Greeks are like the foundation of Europe, right? They established basically culture in Europe, something which was mainly unknown. I'm sorry sometimes to say things like this, but so Alexander the Great, my co-name guy, established like in 300 to 400 before Christ his big empire, and also expanded towards Egypt, and wanted to link, of course, the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean because of trade. And you know, later on he went also to India to conquer it, where he failed though, and like everything fell down a little bit. But he wanted to establish this trade route and like make it even bigger. And what can be quoted as a big achievement of those this Greek period is that a lot of things were written down basically. So there was like a log of this Red Sea region with all details about the kingdoms, empires, spices, etc. that was traded in this way, and it was called the Periplus of the Erythrean Sea. Of course, I like the name. But it means basically like the log of the Red Sea. So Erythrea is like a word from derived from Greek actually, which means like also red only. So it's here is erythrocytes, if you know, which means red blood cells also. That's where the name come from. But in this log, he established basically a lot of knowledge about geography, peoples, cultures, trading, posts, etc. So can be credited to him definitely. And he really established like this trade route also between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, which is an extremely important one, which you may see especially from the next one that kind of established a big presence in that region, which was the Roman Empire. So 27 before Christ, with the establishment of Augustus or Octavian as an emperor in Rome, he conquered, of course, not only Rome. As you know, the Roman Empire was big. He had like mainly the Middle Eastern region of the Red Sea littoral countries, and including Egypt under his rule for a while. And he established basically, or he furthered and increased the trade to have access to China, which may be surprising me, but China comes also at that time already into play, which was a huge, huge civilization, of course, and a very rich one. And the trade was then from China via India. So the Indian Ocean became really crucial to have this presence, and goods were exported vice versa from Rome to China and also all of the in-between countries, of course, via this link of Red Sea and Indian Ocean. So it was a very important period also. And what I found interesting, I will open a little bracket there, is that my sources claimed that the Axumite Empire actually broke the trade for the Romans for a while. I was very surprised, since in my understanding of the Axumite Empire, they actually benefited a lot from this trade and really rose to power in it. So they were like big traders and got like, according to a Persian source, one of the four biggest empires of that time. So 27 before Christ up to 2400 after Christ, I think they were like a very big empire. And they traded mainly ivory, spices, incense, which is still like I would say, delicacy of the region. You know, incense like what you burn in religious ceremonies or when you drink coffee, etc. But also people, slaves, which is a period that's not that often talked about, I would say, in our history of the Horn of Africa, because we were also implicated in it. So we were not the victims, as everybody claims to be a victim, you know, but we were also big slave traders basically at that time, and a part of the riches, I would say, of Axumine's succeeding empires was also the trade of slaves, basically. So I know it's a very touchy topic, especially also for Africans, of course, because Africans were a lot traded as slaves. But also, I don't want to miss the fact that we were also, all Africans also, were big slavers, slave masters, or like slave sellers, basically. And not only in our region, but also further inwards. But I will concentrate on our region. And I know that one of the riches of Ethiopian empire at the time or later on also was the slave trade. But anyhow, just to give you a bit of an idea, I think I researched it a little bit because I don't know so much about the Islamic slave trade. I know more about the Christian slave trade inside of Ethiopia, because it was not only done by Muslims as is often claimed by the Christians. I guess the Muslims will also claim that the Christians were something worse. But anyhow, I know that it often has to do with religion, and it seems to be that in pre-Islamic times, like the Europeans, the Arab enslaved each others also, and due to the religious factor, they didn't want to enslave Muslims anymore. Same as Christians also didn't want to enslave Christians inside of the Ethiopian Empire. So the trade went further south, and I know in our like Ethiopian or Abyssinian Empire, we basically took people from the southern or southwestern region of different tribes, let's say, but one tribe was especially affected. I want to say it also. It was in derogatory terms called Gala at the time, but it's now the Oromo tribe, basically. So there's some historic grievances you can see up to now. There's a real hate from many also towards us, Highlander people who were ruling these times. And this area mainly had the biggest power centers. And we made trade also with the Muslim empires at the time. And it is interesting to know, of course, I don't know the history of the Oromo people. I think between each other, and of course, they were also in power positions selling peoples like all over Africa. I know Mali was also a big empire of slave trades, basically, and also others. But we used to sell the slaves or our own people also. And again, those are also our own people. I'm sure also some other, not only Oromo people, also Tigrinya, Amharic people, and others were also traded, as was the case all over the world, since people also already dominated always and enslaved the people that they dominated over. But I know it's a very touchy subject, and I don't know much of it, so I don't want to make too big claims. But anyhow, it's kind of a fact that we had this up to, I think, 1960. This slave trade was ongoing from our region towards mainly like two ways actually. There was one way that was going towards to Baghdad and other countries via the land side basically, but the Red Sea trade was mainly towards Saudi Arabia, I think, and also some other. It was in Jeddah, Mecca, I think, me also Muscat in Oman. There were some slaves traded, and what was traded mainly was women, so female concubines they call them. There were workers, laborers, and also eunuchs, or eunuchs, which are like castrated people that were to observe the women of other people. So, like a very interesting history if you want to deep dive into it. I remember I've seen a lecture of a Moroccan guy basically talking about the Saharan slave trade, which is another one, but which touches also on this one. When I was in Lebanon, and he was kind of going into that. And I remember at that time I said, why don't we look at the migratory flows that are going on nowadays towards these countries, which are often referred to as modern systems of slavery. But I think this term is also exaggerated because people choose to go. Like they are rarely like taken and forced to go. But it has, of course, reasons of poverty, etc., that kind of forces people to go. So that's a different topic, though, and I want to put the unifying aspect in it. But I don't want to erase our own guilt or history out of it, because I think the only way forward is to accept the points that have happened and go together in a spirit of cooperation and moving on, not at the expense of others, but together. So it is an interesting time. 1960, it was abolished in the Arab countries that the Ethiopian or Habesha or Abyssinian Empire sold slaves to. Before that, it was also abolished by the British in their colonies. So that's why some, let's say, destination countries fell out, and some others were more into the target, which I think in the 1800s, it was mainly the ban came from the British, and the export mainly went to the Hijaz, which is like present day Saudi Arabia and Jordan, I think. Anyhow, in the next extremely important time that I want to touch upon is the Middle Ages. As you know, in the Middle Ages, spices were really the gold of the time. As you know, even, Europeans, Spanish, Portuguese people, like the big empires, trade empires at that time, tried to reach new destinations to have spices, the Europeans, because the Muslim countries blocked like the access to a large part of the world, mainly to India, where most of the spices came from. They were looking for new trade routes, and that's how they discovered the US. Discovered in terms of European eyes, let's say. And that's a very interesting factor that shows just how important the spice trade was already at that time. And due to the blockages and all of the historical context at that time, I mean, there were the Crusades happening. Europeans wanted to have access to the holy sites or like dominate them, let's say, and attacked pilgrims to Mecca and were kicked out partially, etc. But there were also like several sieges happening. For example, the Portuguese in 1513 tried to lay siege on Aden, which is like just a bit north of the Erythrean coast, the southern Yemeni side. They failed, but later on received it as a protectorate because it wanted to be protected from the Ottoman, which was a big presence. The Ottoman, which are like claimed by the Turkish as their ancestors, or like are mainly Turkish, a Turkish power that was very present in the Middle East and shaped its history, and also Eritrean history. As I mentioned, like some parts of northern Eritrea, especially on the coast, were dominated by the Ottomans or Egyptian, we say often, but they were like Ottomans, at least pro forma, um, for a long time also. But what is interesting about Egypt, like let's dive a bit into Egypt. So like 1513, 1525, they received the protectorate, the Portuguese, but in 1798, Napoleon, the French get into the game also, tried to conquer Egypt. And it's actually super interesting. It made me dive a bit into Egyptian history, which I had not much knowledge of, honestly, before. So apparently in 1517, Egypt became an Ottoman province, but always a very unstable one because of local resistance and also others, and also European meddling. So this Ottoman Egypt was in very good relations, or good, let's say like close. I don't know if they were like forced upon relations, like often in like interstate relations, or like from other motivations, but the commercial relations and political relations, but mainly commercial with the British and the French. And there was kind of competition between both of them, since both of them also tried to establish world dominance basically as much as they could. So in 1798, France tried to conquer Egypt basically through Napoleon. And the idea behind it was to establish trade dominance and kick the British out. They failed. They got kicked out. The British established even stronger ties with the Ottoman rulers at that time, but they left a marked impact. So this leads us back to the Suez Canal. Because in 1869, so sometime after 1798, of course, the Suez Canal was opened. But apparently, the construction went a lot also with architects from France. There's one name I found called Jean-Baptiste Lepère, and he participated in Napoleon's exploit in Egypt, or basically his conquest trial. And he was one of the main architects of the Suez Canal, apparently. So, like, there you see how the diplomatic relations went with countries who are often seen also as like having nothing to do with each other, like also us, like the Habesha, the Ethiopian, Erythrean rulers were in close contact to Indians, Arabs, Greek, Europeans. They even sent emissaries to Jerusalem often, but also to Europe, like ambassadors to talk to Europeans. So it's not like Africa was like a dark continent where nothing happened. That's what I want to say. That means a lot of things happened. We were also implicated in a lot of the horrific things that happened, like the slave trade, but also other things. But we were not like those people out in the shadows that had no clue about anything. That's just the only point I want to make. They opened the Suez Canal, but also what was discovered, little anecdote, the Rosetta Stone. I don't know if you heard of it, but in that time, the Rosetta Stone was discovered by European like explorers, let's say, that always went with military moves, basically, or with colonial aspirations or dominance aspirations. But they discovered the Rosetta Stone in Egypt. And I know it because I'm a language learner. There's like this Rosetta Stone app, I think. And there's also like, it was seen as like a multilingual stone where the ruling, I think, of a Persian king at the time before was kind of codified in several languages. So it's like a multilingual document. But it also created the school of Orientalism in Europe. So Europeans suddenly fell in love with Egypt and were like creating Egyptology classes, wanted to research the pharaohs, but also like the wider Oriental fields. Maybe even the Ethiopian studies were created there, but I'm not sure that's a claim I'm just making. But European fell in love, and sometimes they fall in love, they want to get so deeply into it. And yeah, so they established all of these thought schools that also have effects like up until recently. If you know Edward Said, for example, this Palestinian British scholar, he made, I think, the first very open critique of Orientalism, because a lot of phantasms and ideas get projected on other peoples and cultures under this guise, saying like they also project these things on Africans often as like being the happy savages, basically, which is not historically something that you can really say, except of course there's very remote regions that have their own cultures and established, but they are definitely not savages too. They have their own cultures that are very deep also. But that's another topic. Anyhow, I wanted just to mention it. And then I wanted to also like emphasize a bit deeper on Egypt at that time. So as I said, 1517 Ottomans ruled it. There were relations with the Europeans, etc. But it was interesting, they were basically kicked out, the Ottomans at the time, in 1952, I think, where Egypt got no, not 1952. They were earlier, like 1570, but there were power struggles between like once the Ottoman left, after the French left, let's say, sorry, I'm confusing sometimes, it's a long time span. There were power strugglings between the local Mamluk, they are called, like the local Mamluks in Egypt, the Ottomans, of course, and also the Albanian mercenaries, who I didn't know before, like which were part of the Ottoman army, and they established like the after the French were kicked out, like the dynasty in Egypt under Muhammad Ali Pasha until 1952, which is incredible. I think like the history of the Arab world is increasingly incredible because of how the power changes left from like ruling family or distinct dynasty to another, and often those dynasty were like mercenaries or slave army parts, like the Ottomans even. I think they were also coming from a previous slaves used in war that somehow gained power. So it's very interesting to go into that dynamics that happened there. I didn't do that enough, but it could be an idea for another video to kind of see how those, let's say, social mobility was possible. But anyhow, like it's an interesting topic, and I just wanted to put another bracket in there. Anyhow, like we went now from the ancient times, which were like marked by the ancient Egyptians, the Persians, the Greek, the Romans, and of course also us. I want to put us in like the Axumite kingdom, which was one of the top four according to this Persian guy. But to the Middle Ages, the spice trade mainly. And what happened afterwards is like I found a bit less. Like it's not the Middle Ages, of course, until 1798. There was already like Napoleon and I think the Baroque time, etc. Like if you take the European reference of the time associations. But the next jump I just found was World War II. Well, of course, a marking event for the whole world. As you know, World War II was not mainly found by Europeans, but fought by Africans and other people that were colonized and put into their armies to fight. If you see, for example, the liberation of France was mainly done by a French government that was exiled in West Africa and created an army in West Africa out of the colonies, then went to France, and before entering France, basically kicked all of them out to have nice pictures of French resistance fighters entering the cities. But just another bracket. Anyhow, and we too, Eritreans, of course, we were fighting in colonial wars in Libya. Like my great grandfather fought in Libya. I know it's even, I even have a picture of him. And in Ethiopia also a lot. Like also, or not only the colonial ones, but also Ethiopians fought a lot in Libya because they were like signed up and paid. It's human beings, let's say. You know, I don't have a maybe too all positive idea of humans, but it's in us. Sometimes we search opportunities and we don't care who pays us sometimes. But well, let's close this bracket. Let's go to World War II. End of World War II. New powers, old powers kind of diminished. And I am actually remarking I put a very European view on all of this, but it's because the public sources I consult in Germany are mainly, well, let's say US sources or English speaking sources, but also what the results that are shown are, of course, dominated by this big Western sources that fund these sites. So I'm sorry for that, but I will use this as an entry point. So anyhow, there's World War II, big powers arise, mainly cold bloc, Eastern bloc, like communist, and Western US bloc, Western, of course, including us too, but like the main powers I'm only talking with. But they kind of meddled a lot in the region, and one of the primary concerns was also the oil trades, like the petrol trades. So oil tankers increased in volume through the Red Sea. As you know, the channel was already, Suez Canal was already established, which is like an extremely important point if you look at world trade. It's like where most goes into. But they kind of fought for dominance in that region. If you know the history a bit, there has been a lot of Marxist communist movements in that region and also the counter movements, of course. But I know, for example, that in Eritrea, there was a big spy base established at the time of the Ethiopian Federation or the Ethiopian annexation of Eritrea from the US that established like the Ganyo station. And they did that because it was like the best point, I think, in the whole world even, or like at least in the region to spy. So radio waves, to capture radio waves and others, because it was of the elevation. And you could like, yeah, that's why they made a deal with the Ethiopian emperor at the time to have the presence of Americans, soldiers and spies. And they established a spy station that you can still visit. Now it's of course something different. People live in there, but it was a big US base at the time. And an interesting point after World War II is also the Six-Day War between many Arab countries and Israel, because Egypt, I think under Nasser at the time, decided to close the Suez Canal. So they did that from 1967 to 1975. Suez Canal was cut, which of course has big interruptions on the world trade. As you may know, COVID, for example, there was an interruption in the world trade, like microchips couldn't arrive, which are crucial for production, for example, even of cars in Germany. So it was a big issue. There was once, like a few years ago, one ship that blocked the Suez Canal, and that was like a big economic effect on a lot of companies and countries. But as you know, sometimes these blockades leave like consequences that are also not good for the country that wants to apply pressure, same as with sanctions. And this is the one type of sanctions that Egypt wanted to put, I guess. But at that time, the Cape route got more and more popular. So like instead of going to the Suez Canal, which is like the shortest route from Asia to Europe, remember China-Europe trade, like even in the Roman times, and of course still, because China is like the manufacturing house and the assembly house of the world. It's the most important like supply chain source, let's say. And if that is disrupted, there's chaos. So at that time, like when the Six-Day War happened, this blockade by Egypt, they went to the Cape Route to South Africa, which is a much longer route. But what I learned, it's actually cheaper. I was really surprised because apparently, like they have like petrol tanks that are cheaper in price, like to keep this running. Still, the problem is though that the time takes longer, of course. Another one is, yeah, basically it's the time, the main problem. If you take the Cape route, which is why I think still like the Suez Canal, let's say the whole Red Sea is the most important trade route in the world, since most trade goes via ships. And another issue which nowadays affects this route is often safety. If you may remember, there were like, for example, a lot of mediatized pirate attacks by Somali pirates with their little shipping boats that kind of took hostages big tankers and demanded ransom. So of course the world reacted. Big military vessels were sent, German vessels were sent, US, everyone sent their vessels to like say protect the vital trade routes from those pirates. But well, protect and keep it clear basically for trade to be able to pass through. And same nowadays, the Houthi militia in Yemen are attacking ships to also interrupt trade. There were, I think, recent airstrikes by the British and Americans on Yemen also because of that. And the whole area in general is a very unstable area. There's always wars. If you look, Ethiopia has war currently. Yemen, of course, is still like not stable and inside of war. Sudan is in war, like almost the whole country. Somalia, of course, is also in war since the 90s already. Djibouti, Eritrea are stable, but like Eritrea is in a lot of tension, of course. And well, this may also explain why there's a lot of military bases in the region. If you see Eritrea has bases from the Emirates, from Saudi Arabia, it is told to have bases from Iran and Israel at the same time, but that's also maybe rumors, who knows. There is also bases in Somaliland. There's Djibouti has bases from every country in the world. Sudan has some bases. Ethiopia, Somalia had issues because of Ethiopia wanting access also to a piece of the Red Sea or like the Indian Ocean, and to be able to be one of the main players in the region. So you see, like politics mix in it always. But I want to give this story as a unifying force so that we can maybe one day move and progress together instead of at the expense of each other, which is also why I want to say some harsh truths that may sound harsh, which, like, for example, referring to the slave trade and our own role as Africans in it. But yeah, I'm wanting just to have a kind of open debate, and it's important to be able to touch on these issues. I don't want to do it disrespectfully, and hope I don't do it. If I do, I want to excuse myself, but I don't want to exempt our own people of fault, of course, but also not other people, but just be able to discuss history kind of openly, at least as far as we know and have access to it. Otherwise, like some countries in that region manage to have some stability, and especially if you look towards the Arab countries, like some of them, like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Oman, I think they are very stable countries that economically also benefit from the resources they have. And our resources, like if you compare it to the African side, or also Yemen, we are in a much weaker position in that terms. But I hope that one day we could be able to find agreements and move forward instead of at the expense of each other. And yeah, just to show you a bit, a quick runaround of like 2020, 2500 to 2000, 2500 before Christ to 2024, like 4000 years of history almost. I hope it's a nice like teaser to dip into more of it. I definitely will do, and also other topics. And I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you keep following, liking, talking about issues among your friends, among each other, and digging a bit and keep the open mind of the world. So I wish you a good Sunday. Goodbye.